In this video, we're going to go over one advanced tip or strategy for every single DPS. So if you want to stop hearing the same generic advice for each of these heroes and start your climb to Grandmaster, then make sure you smash that like, subscribe, and watch to the end of the video. But for those of you who want something more, I am accepting a couple more clients in my private coaching in the links down below. But let's waste some more time and get right into it. Now, the first character that we got to talk about is Genji. And everyone knows that there's some games on Genji where you feel like you can go in very aggressively, you're jumping in, you're getting resets, and it's fairly simple. But there are other situations where the characters are very hard to attack and go into. Let's think Moira, Mei, Sim, and the list goes on. Or it's hard for you to get any assistance from your team because they're playing something like a poke composition with a Sigma playing far away, never going in and trying to close out a fight like you are. On Genji, you need to be fundamentally altering your playstyle based on these factors. Let's take it to the extreme example. You're up against a composition that is really hard for you to pick off anybody, and you're with a composition that doesn't want to go in with you. So what do you do on Genji to get value? Most of the time, you are playing to live and poking from range, not engaging onto any target that you aren't guaranteed to kill. So you're really tracking things like ice block, you're tracking turrets, you're tracking fade. You're looking for an opportunity where someone is low enough for you to 100% kill them, or you're not going in at all. And then you're looking to potentially follow up on ultimates or generate a blade yourself, where you're not necessarily going for a crazy high performance blade unless you have nano. You're typically just trying to get a value blade off that will get 1 to 2 kills. But you got to realize that playing Genji in these conditions severely limit your carry potential and the impact you can have over the game. Still definitely possible for you to perform on Genji, but unless you have a clear exploitable weakness on the enemy team, some character that you can punish purely based on their positioning, and not a character that you have to wait until all their cooldowns are down, which mainly your team is going to have to pressure out, it's far easier to play Genji in the 80% and then have something in the 20% that you could swap to when things get really bad. The next character I have for you is Ashe. Now, I couldn't think of anything crazy advanced with this character. There's a lot of semi-advanced stuff, but I think that the easiest way for an Ashe to get punished is a lack of coach gun conservation. So how you're using this ability, which is your only form of mobility, needs to dramatically change dependent on the types of characters you're up against and the enemy composition. Oftentimes, these things should be saved and held for a situation where a Winston or a Genji or a Tracer tries to close the gap on you. And while your natural instinct is going to be to use these to push an aggressive angle or maybe take the high ground on a whim, realize that oftentimes doing the extra bit of work to just route to the high ground without using coach gun can protect you from getting picked off by one of these characters that is looking to punish you the second they hear that coach gun go off. Now, you're going to see this as a common theme where some abilities need to be used in different ways depending on how you could be pressured and the risk to reward factor of using something early and then not having it where you need it. We talk about this with supports as well, when an Ana can use a grenade or sleep dart more liberally against poke compositions and has to use them more defensively against dive compositions. Now, the next character that we got to talk about is Soldier 76, and the advanced tip I'll give you is the high ground flanks. When, where, and why do you do these flanks? So Soldier can take very, very aggressive high ground positions that sometimes are completely behind the enemy team, where the enemy team is smushed between you and your team. So you're having a full-on crossfire. And you can do this on a number of different maps. Think New Bonnie. You can wrap behind after they cap that first objective point. You can wrap all the way to the high ground on their side and apply a lot of pressure when they come out of the spawn room. You can do it on King's Row, wrapping all the way to the top right high ground and behind them ultimately on attack. You can do it on Esperanza, trying to get the bridge if the opponents have already taken mid-space. You can pressure them from their own bridge. And you might be saying, Mills, every time I do this, I get scouted out, jumped on, killed because I'm all alone, and I feel like I'm in a terrible position. But the thing about Soldier you need to understand is because of your mobility and self-sustain, you can take angles like these without being forced away by small amounts of pressure. And if you monitor the enemy team composition, it can help you decide how strong these are and when to go for them. As an example, let's take that King's Row attack. If they are playing characters that are flat characters, characters that cannot challenge the high ground, ground. No Genjis, no Hanzos, no Ashes, no dive tanks, whatever the case may be. Let's say it's like a Torb, a Mei, a Zarya, an Ana, and just like whatever other support, right? If you take the high ground on Soldier and just exist up there, unless they want to route around, which they just can't do in the mid fight at all, there's no way for them to clear you. This means that you are 100% safe to play from a very far range away from being that high ground, constantly applying pressure to the enemy's supports. And as long as you live, which should be rather easy, and time your engagements based on your teammates' pressure, you're going to be able to have an immense impact and slowly whittle them down. In addition to this can change how you set up a flank on any of the maps, because if you look at their composition and you see they only have maybe one character that can come and pressure you, knowing that that character is on their own flank or doing their own thing or potentially low cooldowns can set you up to start a flank from a very aggressive off angle or even a flank, and perhaps even target the one character that you're most worried about so they're not in a position to pivot onto you, and then you're freed up to have as much impact as you want. Now, the next character that I got to talk about is Sombra, and one of the biggest strengths to Sombra that people don't understand is that Sombra, unlike every other character in the game, will always have perfect timing. Always. And what do I mean by perfect timing? Well, a lot of dive characters want to set up in an optimal position so that when their team jumps in, they are ready to engage. Like Tracers will do this where they'll go get into a good aggressive position. They'll be ready to jump with their team, and then they're trying to conserve cooldowns so that they can get right on that target. And oftentimes, that timing is not perfect. Especially in ranked, it's way off. Like a Winston will jump in, and the Tracer will be like way behind, so you have to utilize 2 or 3 blinks to catch up, or you get spotted out. You get found before you're ready to go in, and then you have to use your recall or back away as your tank's going in, and the timing's just all off. Not to mention, in ranked, most people just don't even try to coordinate, right? But with Sombra in particular, you can stay invis, ping the targets that you want to go on, and literally just wait until your team cobbles together an engage and pop out right then and there. You always get to have the perfect timing. You get to set up exactly when you pop out of invis, and most of the time, Sombras are super easy to deal with when they show themselves they pop out in a off cycle to their team's engage. So they pop out early, like I'm Hanzo, I get to look at them, shoot them a couple of times and force them away, and then the enemy team jumps in and I'm chilling. But if that person pops out simultaneous to the enemy team jumping in, now I'm under a ton of pressure, and as Sombra, you get to always control this. Now, I'm not saying that you should just sit and viz the entire game and wait for your team to engage all the time. You have to cycle this between trying to generate your ultimate, but it is important for you to understand that this is the true power level of Sombra, and if you just slow down and utilize your teammates' aggression to help your engages, which you can perfectly set up in time every time, you will really distinguish yourself from the vast majority of Sombras in the game. Now, the next character that I gotta talk about is Tracer. Now, I'm actually going to give a really cool tip here that I didn't come up with. In fact, this was found out from an interview that Spylo did with Hydron, and he did a video on his channel. I'll put the links in the description down below. But to summarize the concepts here that I thought were so important for my viewers to understand, Tracer's playstyle can fundamentally change dependent on the compositions that you're up against and the compositions that your team has. This is not really that new. Genji does the exact same thing, but specifically whether or not you're supposed to mark an enemy dive character or whether you're supposed to set up and try to engage on your own. This is often a problem for Tracer players where they don't know if they're supposed to set up and go try to one-clip an enemy support, or are they just trying to do damage to the things that are diving their backline, and every single time they go in, they might get one kill or bait out a ton of cooldowns, but their team is dying. So how do you decide what to do, and how do you decide when to play one style of Tracer? Well, you have to look at the compositions and see what your team wants to do and what the opponent team wants to do and who does it better. So if your team is not on a dive composition and the opponents are, your job is not to go in and try to dive nonstop. Not only are you going to be doing that alone, but you're never going to be able to stop the opponents from doing their setup dives. And let's say that they have a Genji, Tracer, and Wrecking Ball, right? And every single time your supports walk forward, they get dove by all 3 and die instantly, right? Because it's just so much pressure, so much damage all at once. But as Tracer, you could go and try to duel their backline, but you're doing it alone. So their dives are going to go better than yours every single time, and your team's going to die. Well, you might be able to get one person, but maybe not even that. So instead, it makes a lot more sense for you to mark some or multiple ones of those divers so that you're messing up their setup and you're messing up their engage. So as an example, what happens to a Tracer that gets a whole bunch of damage taken to them? They're risking their life, and then they have to use recall. Now their ball is going in. Now they can choose to either go in with their ball without recall, which probably will get them killed, or they can't go in with their ball. And now all of a sudden, instead of a Genji Tracer ball diving onto your supports all at once, which will kill both of them instantly, only 2 of them are going, which leaves more opportunity for you to help and your team to survive. And now, because the dive goes wrong, y'all can sustain that dive, mess it up, and now there's going to be a ton of cracks because they have no cooldowns. They might die in the process. So you're basically swapping up between a either setup and engage because your team is more optimized for it, or a disrupt because your team is not going to help you and you get a lot more value by disrupting the enemy's engage instead. And we see a very similar playstyle to this on Doomfist, by the way, which is my current main right now, where I'm often swapping between a setup style up against a dive-centric composition, or a dive style when I have divers to go with me, or a pick-oriented style when I don't need to peel and there's a high amount of damage, so I'm trying to look for a specific pick-off with my power punch. So I want to make it clear that there's a lot of overlapping concepts with these things, and to think about the game this way is really going to expand your game sense overall, regardless of the character that you're picking. Now, the next character that I gotta talk to you is Sojourn. Couldn't think of anything super advanced on Sojourn, but for 1v1s in particular, crouch 80 spams is just really broken on this character because you can just spam your fire as a projectile fast rate of fire weapon. You're gonna be able to hit a good amount of your shots just by spamming crouch over and over again and spamming AD or left and right, generating rail, body shotting with rail. You're gonna win so many 1v1s this way. Even really, really great players are gonna just whiff straight up on Sojourn's head. I mean, it's just like impossible. It's ridiculous. So definitely something I would suggest to abuse. And if you need to, go into a third-person workshop mode and look at your own headshot alteration or your headshot hitbox alteration and practice your movement, because it's actually broken if you nail it right. The next character that I got to talk about is Hanzo, and one of the biggest strengths on Hanzo a lot of people don't even utilize, and it's the fact that Hanzo can take a very, very long distance angle and pressure the enemy team from the sides, one of the 90-degree angles relative to your team. And you can do this because Hanzo can be effective from a very long range. It's easier to hit shots on targets that are not looking at you or aware of your presence, and it's very, very difficult to flush out a Hanzo, especially up against some compositions. You could be a complete nightmare. So there's really 2 tricks to make this work. The number 1 is timing. The number 2 is the composition you're up against. So the timing is you do it right when your team is fighting the enemy team. So you're setting up in these really long distance flanks and you're pressuring. You're not necessarily behind the enemy team. Like I said, you're at a 90-degree compared to your team, and you're taking pot shots over and over again, and you get to just stay here. You're so far away that unless the enemy has a specific composition, which we'll talk about in a second, they can't do anything about you other than send like 2 or 3 people after you. And if you time this right, it's going to be really hard for them to just bail out. So in the moment, it's going to feel like the enemy team are put between a rock and a hard place. They're taking logs from this Hanzo that's really far away, but they can't afford to send resources after the Hanzo because they're in a fight with your team. And if you get any lucky shots here at all, they're just dead. If they send a whole bunch of people after you, depending on what those players are, you can run away before they can even come near you. And oftentimes, if they just send one person, it's really easy to set up a trap with your sonic arrow to punish that person. So this is super, super strong, and something that we're seeing a lot right now up against the brawl compositions and the brawl mirrors in pro play, where Hanzo will take this long aggressive flank. But it's actually just completely busted in ranked play as well. And Hanzos often will put themselves in a way too close position where it's easy to pressure them out because they're trying to increase their accuracy. But you got to realize that just by living and applying pressure, you're generating so much value. You don't need to be hitting headshots left, right, and center. And in fact, it's about the length of your overall engagement. So how long can you shoot for without getting forced away? How long can you shoot for without dying? maybe if you were really up close, you would get 5 shots that are more accurate, but why not take the 20-30 shots that are less accurate, but put you in a safe position, still apply a ton of pressure, and even if they're less accurate overall, you're getting to fire so much more of them from a safe position and apply pressure while you do it. And the next character that we got to talk about is Widowmaker. And a lot of times people just summarize Widowmaker as a character that is all about aim, but really Widowmaker is the war of information and not aim. So basically, Widowmaker wants to not only know the location of everyone on the enemy team, especially other Widowmakers and counters to them, but they want to always deny information to the enemy team, which keeps them guessing. So as an example, a Widowmaker doesn't want to be constantly peeking the same angle, because once opponents identify an angle as an angle that the Widowmaker's in, it's so much easier to play around them. I mean, you know this also because the second that a Widowmaker is pinged on the enemy team, you feel like you can play around that line of sight. So a Widowmaker needs to be constantly mixing up the angles that they're peeking. You peek one angle for a little while, and then you move on to the other angle so that enemies that are playing around the first angle could get caught out from the second angle, and so on and so forth. The thing about Widow is that once you build up a certain level of aim, then enemies that are not prepared for you are essentially free kills, or enemies that are not playing around where you could be positioned. So if you can deny information to the enemy constantly change that information up and play from different angles, then it leaves the opponents completely guessing. And in addition to that, if you have clear information about where the enemy team are, especially your threats are concerned, you can set up a game plan to fight them from an angle they don't know when you know where they are. And this is really how a Widowmaker can just destroy an enemy team. You set up an informational war against the enemy Widowmaker, fight an unfair fight where you have a huge advantage because you don't engage until you know exactly where they are, or you're trying to generate value without ever peeking them. And then once you win that fight because you won on the information front, now nothing can counter you on the battlefield. So it's really important that you understand these core things about Widow. While yes, aim is definitely a very important aspect of Widowmaker and something that you should be constantly developing and improving on, the war of information is something that is really important for you to understand if you want to level up your overall impact, and also not tie every bit of your impact purely to whether or not you can 50-50 a shot. Great Widowmakers that have good aim and understand this concept will beat you every single time. Now, the next character that we got to talk about is Echo. Now, for the advanced tip for this, I want you to realize that some maps allow you to heavily abuse rooftops because you can slide on them and generate cooldowns. Think like Esperanza, where if you fly up and slide on these rooftops, you get to stay out of line of sight of the enemy, and then build up your cooldown so that you could fall down, mines, beam, and then still have your fly to fly away. Now, the biggest mistake, though, I see on Echo players is the bad copies. A lot of players severely underestimate duplicate because they just don't get a lot of value out of it. They just swap to something and die right away. You need to be thinking about the instant value you'll get with a copy, especially if you're not setting it up with your team and you have no assurance that you'll stay alive or get peel or be enabled by your team. You need to copy something that right when you copy, you're not playing for their ultimate or anything else. You're playing for what you can get right the moment that you copy. So really powerful abilities like Nade, or things that you don't even think about like a Rhine Shield, are going to be more value on average, and even maybe just more value period, than playing for something like a Blade or even something crazy like a Bob. The next character that we got to talk about is Reaper. And a lot of people just flat out don't play Reaper correctly at all. Now, one of the biggest things that people just don't use properly is his teleport. Reaper has the capability to move around the map unlike any other character can, and this means that you can walk onto a fight, note the high ground, see who's up there. If no one's up there, you can literally insta-teleport in the mid-fight, get above the enemy, and put yourself in a position to drop on the enemy at a moment's notice. Or if there's an enemy up there that you're not afraid of, you can literally just straight up challenge them. And Reaper can take this verticality very, very aggressively. And at any stage of the fight, you should always be thinking about when and where you can take that high ground, because you could just take it just at a moment's notice. And also, through coaching a lot of Reaper players, I see that Reapers really don't hard commit enough. And what I mean by that is that Reaper's effective range is as close as freaking possible. So when you are deciding to commit to a target, you not only have lifesteal, but you have more health than most squishies. So I want you to actually commit to a target. And I'm not really talking about tanks here. I know that Reaper can be a tank buster, but really, Reaper is fantastic at just straight up killing anything, killing squishies. Get close to them, teleport to set up to a high ground, wait for the right moment, walk as close as possible, and full commit, and then use your rate to get away. This is what Reaper can do, but a lot of players are giving away their position before they're close enough to do vast amounts of damage, or they are trying to play this middle ground where they're just living and existing, but not actually generating any hard value. Reaper is really all about these cycles of engagement. So you combine an aggressive use of teleporter with hard engages based on your cycles, and that's really the way to hard carry on Reaper. Now, the next character that we got to talk about is Junkrat. Now, for Junkrat, you need to understand that you have immense power inside any room. If you exist in a corner in a room and basically play from out of this room, then opponents are in a really hard position where they want to push you, they want to deny you, they want to kill you, but if they ever come after you in a room like this, not only is your trap there, but you can fill the entire room with just raw damage, which means that you are very, very hard to deal with. And the thing about Junkrat is, if you can just exist and occupy space, deny space with your damage, and generate tires, you can just completely dominate a game. And most of the time, you want to position yourself in a place where if opponents want to push you, if they want to press you, it's going to cost them. And that's really how you get the most out of Junkrat, not by playing open areas, not by allowing yourself to get killed while you fly through the air, by maximizing what Junkrat is good at and controlling the terms of the engagement. And this is true for every single character, and not even just for DPS. You are playing to your strengths, and you're forcing opponents to come and play to your strengths, and that's really how you leverage your value. Now, the next character that we got to talk about in this video is Phara. Now, the first thing that a lot of players don't understand when you have a pocket is that Phara wants to do a ton of self-damage. She's a masochist, and you want to shoot a rocket at the ground as you fly up to give you an extra boost. And when you're on a rooftop, oftentimes you want to shoot the roof itself to keep you up and high while you're just sitting there waiting for the enemy team to appear. So you're using self-damage as a form of slight mobility just to keep you elevated a little bit longer. And this only works when you have a pocket, of course, or else you'll kill yourself, but it is very important for you to understand. Now, more importantly, though, I want to talk about how great Pharas just counter hit scans, actually. Really, really amazing Pharas don't have any problem playing into hit scan, and you might think that that's weird, but the vast majority of Phara players play into the open far too long. They don't use cover, and Phara oftentimes wants to use buildings and rooftops as your form of cover, and for the vast majority of the game, you are applying pressure because you're really, really far away outside of the fall off range of most hit scans, and making sure that you're peaking very, very sparsely, and you're just applying pressure with your zero fall off long distance rockets, looking for an opportunity to concussion, closing the gap, dive bomb on a target. So the idea here is that you're very deliberate, and that's the defining factor between a good Phara and a bad Phara. Is a Phara is either playing in a way to live and apply pressure from a safe distance, or they're going in aggressively, looking to close out a fight with close range rockets. There's no in between. You're not flying into the open. You're not playing in the mid ground. You're not allowing yourself to get picked off, and you're not giving a hit scan zero respect. You need to imagine that a hit scan will kill you in 2 shots. So if you're peeking the open for longer than a Cassidy can shoot 2 shots, then you're messing up, and you're not giving hit scans the respect that they deserve, and this is why you're getting countered while many Pharas are hard carrying games. Now, the next character that I gotta talk about in this video is Bastion, and the thing that's the most important to master on Bastion is not how you use the turret or your aim or any of those factors, it's when you commit the turret. Bastion is not a character that is really, aim is not really that important on this character. It's more about looking for the conditions where turret will get value and committing to it then. So a good Bastion is patient with turret form, because after you use turret, opponents don't have to fear you. So you need to be getting value when you pop turret, and the value should be already in front of you. You should know before you pop it that this person's out of position, so I could beam them. There's no cooldown here that I have to play around, and I can commit to turret and get some value. So it's about setting it up, looking, being patient, and then committing at the right time. And this is how you get the value out of Bastion. So I want you to not just jump around corners and pop to turret, but be more disciplined and patient, setting up the conditions to where you pop into it, you kill the Lucio immediately. You pop into it, you instantly punish this person. You pop into it, you know that you can break the shield, apply pressure, kill a person. And unless you have a plan or an envisioned plan for what you're going to do with turret, don't pop it and wait for the better situation to use it. And the next character that I got for you is Cassidy. And the thing about Cassidy that a lot of players don't understand is, why can a Cassidy play behind a Rhine or behind your team when, let's say, a soldier cannot or a soldier should not? Well, let's think about this. When you are playing, let's say, on the front line or behind your front line, right, behind your tank, and an opponent comes out and peeks you for, let's say, 4 seconds, right? They come out and peek, they do a little bit of damage, and they go back behind cover, right? A soldier is going to have a really hard time killing a person there. Well, you could hit them with your Helix. Besides that, you're doing slow incremental damage. You're not doing burst damage. But a Cassidy, if someone peeks you for a small amount of time, you can body head them. You can body head them. You can head them. You can get kills in the small frames of time on the front line where opponents are going in and out of natural cover. And that is why Cass plays these positions so well, is because you don't need a long amount of time. You don't need to set up in a position where you have clear lines of sight on the opponents for an extended period, right? You can get kills in quick bursts, and that's really why Cassidy plays these areas so well. So understanding that, you got to realize that most of the time when you are playing in these great positions and you're not killing someone, it's not your job to just avoid or leave and go for a flank and go for a really aggressive area, because you don't have the mobility to do so. And over time, you will eventually generate these values, and approval of your picks and your crosshair placement and your position will help aid in that. But I want to really clearly define why Cassidy plays this so well and other characters don't, so you understand why you should do this rather than just being told this is where you should stand, versus other characters that just get to play wherever they freaking want, and Cassidy does not. This is why. Now, the next character that we have is Torb. Didn't have any super advanced stuff for Torb, but I will say that very similar to, let's say, Ashe, how you use your molten form is going to be different depending on what you're up against, right? Like, you don't want to use it for raw damage and poke if the opponents are going to engage onto you and then you don't have it. Oftentimes, you want to play more passively. Of course, setting up your turret in a defensive position so that it looks over your team as opposed to poking the enemy down, because you don't want it to get destroyed pre-engage, but also saving that molten so that you have it to use when the opponents are on you. But if you're up against other compositions where you don't need to do that, you could use it more liberally to apply more pressure just in general, and just use it whenever you need to just apply that pressure. So it's going to be a different use of this ability, and how you use this ability is going to change depending on what threats you're up against. Another common theme, and this is true for every single character, really important concept to nail down. Next up, we do got to talk about Mei. Now, Mei Wall is a really, really amazing ability that has a very high skill ceiling, but a lot of players just use it to wall off a tank, and while that can get a lot of value if the tank doesn't play around it or their team don't help them get bailed out from it, Wall can be used for far more than just walling off a tank and killing them. Wall is just a resource denial ability. If someone is weak and you think that your team can kill them, walling off the supports to prevent things like Suzu and Nade can be the difference between a kill and someone that just gets spelled out for free. And timing that at the right moment oftentimes can be even better than purely just using Wall whenever you have it. In addition to that, you can split enemies off, deny rotations, deny line of sight. And a very powerful but difficult way to use it is to literally counter opponents' abilities. So you can counter things like Rock, instantly shutting it down afterwards, counter ultimates, counter hooks, and the list goes on and on. I mean, really, Wall is a very, very strong ability, but the thing I would suggest for you to do is practice it in a place where you can just have unlimited walls. Practice splitting when and where you want to split, from range, from close range, denying across, denying behind. Wall should be something that you should be able to place exactly where you want to every single time, because you never know what resource that you can just deny from the enemy team at a moment's notice to generate some huge advantage. Not to mention, wall can be exchanged for time if your team needs it to generate their cooldowns back. So your team is like low health, low cooldowns. Sometimes wall just needs to be used defensively, giving your team that extra bit of time they need to reset their cooldowns, reset their health, and then retake the fight under more optimal conditions. The last but not least, we have Symmetra, and there's two predominant playstyles that you should think about when playing this character. One is a spatial denial playstyle, and one is a more pressure-centric, almost dive style of playstyle. So the spatial denial is setting yourself up in choke points, putting sim turrets on areas that you want to punish an opponent for pushing up and past, and your team gets to play around this. So if you're playing in a choke and you're constantly wiggling in and out of a choke, applying pressure, the second the opponents get any advantage, they're going to want to press, and oftentimes they're going to press into your turrets that are around the choke point, and they're going to take damage, and you're going to be able to leverage that. So you play in and around that space and deny them that form of pressure so that your team get to constantly push in. If they're at a disadvantage, they back off, and then your sim turrets kind of deny, and if they push in and things go well, you could just take that engagement. So you get to kind of pick and choose and only take engagements that favor you. And then the opposite end of that is the pressure creation, where you're looking for moments to do like a triple teleport where you're sending in 3 turrets with the teleport and maybe even yourself, applying pressure to the enemy, but you're looking for the right time. You're doing it onto a target or at an enemy that they are going to be under a ton of pressure because they need to heal their team or they need to do something in the fight, but you're applying pressure at the exact same time. And of course, you want to make it so that your turret is going in a place that not everyone on the enemy team can see, so that if they just tunnel vision focus on the turret, you're going to pop in and get a ton of value, or they're not going to be able to destroy it, in which case you applied that pressure, created that space, maybe got a kill, maybe didn't, but at least drew attention and cooldowns, then you get to go back to your team for free. So this is really the two types of playstyles that you should play, and with both of these playstyles, you could pretty much find value on Symmetra no matter what composition, which is really, really amazing, and one of the reasons why she's so versatile and strong for ranked. Now, I hope that this has helped you level up your knowledge on every single one of these characters, but if you have any questions about these, definitely let me know in the comments down below. Make sure to check out my private coaching. Links will be in the description, and thank you so much for coming by. Hope you enjoyed the video, and I'll see you next time.